And joining us now on the debate, in the nation's capital, MacKenzie, the retired Major General of the Canadian Armed Forces, and Roland, University Research Chair in International Security and Governance at the University of Ottawa. And here in studio, Najia Haneefi, founder of the Afghan Women's Political Participation Committee, and Sally Armstrong, contributing editor at Macleans magazine and the author of Bitter Roots, Tender Shoots, The Uncertain Fate of Afghanistan's Women. Glad to have everybody both in the nation's capital and in the provincial capital for this discussion on an issue that has been with us for a decade but seems particularly topical once again, if I can put it that way, given the surge, given the latest comments from Hamid Karzai, given the hearings that are taking place in Ottawa right now with the allegations around prisoner abuse, and given what Hillary Clinton just recently said on her trip to Ottawa. So let's go through some of this if we can. MacKenzie, to you first. 30,000 additional troops that began to surge at Christmas time will be completed by this summer. What impact so far, if any, do you think that's having?
Well, other than the fact that from a NATO perspective it's about 10 years late, it's good news for the Canadians, it's good news for Kandahar province in relative terms as to what's been happening, primarily because they're able to provide some security for parts of the local population along major routes where 80% of the population in Kandahar province in particular is located. I think it's a NATO failure that the Canadians have been there more or less by themselves. There's been a few others like the Romanian small contingent with them, you know, since the spring, the early days of 2006, and you just can't conduct a counterinsurgency operation with probably on any one day 800, 900 folks outside the wire. So it's good news for the Canadians, but what a condemnation that it was America that had to do the vast majority of the surge, when in actual fact there are a number of other NATO nations that haven't participated. In fact, the majority of them haven't participated in the surge. I thought the alliance was one for all and all for one.
Apparently not. Sally, do you share his view on how bad this is actually, that so many others have not participated?
You know, Steve, we've known for such a long time that prior to this surge, we had 1/25th the military and 1/50th the humanitarian aid that we had in Bosnia and Kosovo. So if you do the math, you know they couldn't do the job without additional people on the ground. So as Lou said, they were tied before. They couldn't get the job done. My guess is they will move rapidly forward now because they have the numbers.
Roland, what do you say on the surge?
I say it's too early to really be able to judge whether it is being effective or is going to be effective. These surge troops are still flowing into the country, won't be fully there until the end of the summer. And the first major operation under the new principles articulated by the NATO commander, General McChrystal, really just took place very recently in Helmand province next to Kandahar. We'll see, I think, over the next few months. Probably it'll take several months, if not sometime in 2011, we'll be able to judge the effects of the surge in Helmand and now in Kandahar.
Najia, what's your sense about whether the people in Afghanistan want more foreign troops coming in?
Well, actually, when you're going to the unsecure places of Afghanistan, people are really willing to have more security forces to be there because they are still under the threat of Taliban, plus poverty and so many other issues that exist in Afghanistan. They are complaining from the casualty, especially from the civilian casualty, but psychologically they are under so much pressure of Taliban, so they need security, and for that I think the presence of the NATO allies in Afghanistan is very important. So partially people are welcoming their presence for getting rid of Taliban, and partially they are under the pressure of the civilian casualty.
Gotcha. Sally, Hamid Karzai. He was supposedly, quote unquote, our guy over there. Now he says if we don't lay off, he may threaten to join the Taliban. Some people think he's lost his mind. Some people say, for sure, his brother's involved in the drug trade over there and is running a corrupt government. Is he still our guy?
I mean, the guy's turned into a loose cannon. The kinds of things he said, particularly in the last few weeks, but actually starting a year ago now, when he signed the Shia family law and clearly cut a deal with the extremists in order to buy himself some voting power. You could tell the guy was slipping away. Now he's slipped farther away. I think there's a lot to be concerned about. While things like the surge presumably are going to begin to handle the insurgency, and other issues in the country are starting to improve, here we have the president looking like he's turned into a loose cannon.
Lou MacKenzie, is he still our guy?
Well, he's the only guy we got right now. That's the point. That's why we have to work with him. But I remember the late Tip O'Neill, Speaker for the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress, saying all politics is local. We've all been repeating that, imitating him ever since. I mean, he was playing to an audience. He's already dealing with some of the Taliban, the more moderate elements of the Taliban. So I didn't get quite as excited about that particular comment. He's got survival challenges, and the Afghans are probably a lot better at that than we are.
Najia,
politically.
If he is the most popular guy over there, and he did just win the election, but so many people think he stole the election, and why would you need to steal an election if you're the most popular guy over there? I'm kind of going in a circle here. Do people still have confidence in his leadership over there?
Well, it depends where the people are living.
Sure.
Well, the people who didn't vote for him, they're not counting on him and they don't have confidence on him, but there are still people backing him and supporting him.
How about you?
I am personally neutral in this issue, but I'm coming back to the issue of his threat to the West. Or is he still your guy or not?
Mm-hmm.
I would say that he is under so much pressure for the time being, pressure of the issue of corruption, pressure of the insecurity, pressure of the election fraud. So there are so many pressure from the West on him. And he wanted to show for the Afghan people that he is not a puppet president of the country, and he is helpless. And he wanted to kind of, with this message, he wanted to kind of invite Taliban to join him. Not necessarily he is going to join Taliban. I think it was an invitation, and I think he was in a very emotional stage. And when he is in an emotional stage, I would really not take his words seriously.
Okay, Roland Paris, is he an appropriate partner for us at this stage of our commitment?
Well, I think that the last two interventions basically captured it. Number one, he's the only partner at this time who can credibly claim to speak on behalf of all the Afghan people. It doesn't mean he's the only partner that we have in Afghanistan, because our military and civilian leaders are dealing with other Afghan leaders at all levels. In the national government, at the provincial level, and very much at the local level now, which is really incorporated into McChrystal's surge strategy. So we have to deal with him. He did make statements that were on the face bizarre, but he has been a theatrical person in the past. He is under a tremendous amount of pressure, and I agree with the comments that he is positioning himself to demonstrate that he is not a tool of the international community. The Taliban propaganda is always describing him in those terms. He's trying to lead a reconciliation process. He's got a peace jirga, a big meeting coming up at the beginning of May. And the fact is that he also has a very good, from all reports, daily working relationship with General McChrystal. So, we would like him to be Thomas Jefferson or Nelson Mandela or John A. Macdonald, but he ain't. And frankly, if he were, he'd be the only leader in that part of the world who was.
Okay. Well, let me take that information and General MacKenzie, follow up with you on this. When the leader of a country for whom this country has already sacrificed, more than 100 of its best. And when you hear, and I'm going to dovetail into the next issue then, when you hear about the hearings that are going on in Ottawa right now, where the role of the Canadian soldier in perhaps turning prisoners over to others who we knew would torture them, what's that doing to morale for the troops in the field?
Well, I think you and I have discussed, Steve, the difference between morale and attitude. Morale is not a problem. When people have bad morale, they're sullen, they're withdrawn, they don't want to do their job, they don't volunteer for anything, and I've never seen Canadian soldiers in that situation. However, attitude's different. You can really get pissed off, and I'm sure they're very pissed off in the field, and those that have come back and those that have gone over. When we have a committee on the Hill that should be looking at the serious issue of what happens after 2011, after our withdrawal, what are we leaving behind, if anything, and they're spending their time on gotcha politics, when in actual fact the Military Police Complaints Commission has been working this file for 2.5 years, and get it off the Hill and get it into their hands, although it's now become fairly popular, the coverage in the media is focusing on that commission. But it's not a happy situation. And I think it should be looked at. I think it should be investigated. I think accusations should be taken seriously. However, for our elected representatives while we're at war to be obsessed with it day in and day out, that's disappointing to the extreme.
Sally, the general is correct when he says that the opposition politicians are quite exercised about this, and they have been asking questions on almost a daily basis about whether we knowingly transferred people to an authority, even though we knew they'd be tortured if we did that. Is it your sense that the Canadian public is as similarly exercised about these allegations?
No, it is not. I totally agree with Lou. Excuse me. This is gotcha politics. And it is tiresome to the max. I mean, something happened 3 years ago. Witnesses are suddenly turning up 3 years after the fact to say, well, this is what I heard. What does that say about what is going on this file? I don't think it's getting any traction with the Canadian people, partly because this is something, it needs to be investigated. There have been allegations made. They are serious. You have to have an investigation. But this has very little to do with taking Afghanistan forward as a country, which is why we're there in the first place. So,
Roland Parrish, should we not care about this?
Well, I differ a bit with the two earlier speakers on this. I do think that it's a serious issue, and that the government does need to answer questions which fundamentally won't be answered until it divulges information that's in documents that either it hasn't released or it's released in a redacted way. You know, I am a former government official for a brief period myself, and during that time was involved in reviewing access to information requests, and I'm stunned by the extent to which the national security portion of the Act is being used to withhold information. I'm involved in my own dispute with DND to release information not on detainees but on another matter where there's no grounds for withholding. Having said all that, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to be having a debate about what this country, Canada, is going to be doing beyond 2011. Even if it's just civilian, we still need to have that debate. Afghanistan is the #1 bilateral aid recipient for Canada, not just now, but in our history. And we've made this tremendous commitment for the last 8.5, 9 years. And there's virtually nobody, with the exception of occasional questions, and he deserves credit for it, from Bob Rae, the Liberal foreign affairs critic, asking the government, so what's going to happen after 2011? And there haven't been any answers other than there won't be troops.
Well, let's continue that discussion. Najia, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State of the United States, came up here recently and also asked the government to consider making a commitment beyond 2011. Do you think we should?
Well, we should see that where we are at, why we were in Afghanistan at the first place. Mm-hmm. Did we meet our goal? I think that Canada is not only there for the sake of Afghan people. Canada is there for the risk that exists for the global security by international terrorism. We should see that is that risk or is that threat is under the control. If it is under the control, it's the right time to withdraw. If it is not, it is not.
Okay, General MacKenzie, if those are the criteria by which we make the decision, and those are, you know, two perfectly legitimate criteria to consider, should Canada be reevaluating its decision to get out next year?
Well, personally, I believe that's the case. I mean, I get a little tired of the same old mantra that we're there in Afghanistan so to keep Al-Qaeda away so we can sleep soundly at night. You know, that rationalization, I think, disappeared a couple of years ago. Al-Qaeda has moved on over the border into other locations around the world. Personally, I'm horrified at the thought of the Pakistani Taliban joining up with the Afghanistan Taliban and all of a sudden threatening Islamabad. I mean, they were within 100 kilometers about a year ago from the capital of Pakistan. I figure when they get 99 kilometers from the capital, India intervenes and there goes the neighborhood, to exaggerate, to make the point. I mean, this is much more than Afghanistan, as important as Afghanistan is. This is a serious, serious challenge in the most volatile part of the world, and we're there, we're part of it, and we've done an outstanding job. Quite frankly, I don't think we have the capability militarily to perpetuate the presence of the battle group. You and I have discussed the size of our army, which fits into Maple Leaf Gardens with empty seats left over when they sit down. The infantry is smaller than the Toronto Police Force. They are really somewhat tired, even though they're oversubscribed for volunteers for every one of the rotations that are coming up. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the soldiers. I'm an outsider looking in and saying there are other things we could be doing, and some of them could well be military.
Sally, you've been there many times. You know the people want security. You've told us here before about the job the Canadian troops do to ensure that young girls get to go to school, for example. What does this country need to do in 2011?
Well, you know, Canada's done a lot, Steve. Canada's contributed a great deal to Afghanistan, both with the military, financially. We've done a lot of rebuilding. We have a lot to be proud of. So if the military feel, if the government say you're leaving, but if the military feel they've done their share and they're being replaced with another military that can carry the load, then I don't have a problem with that. It's if they're withdrawing and they don't have the boots on the ground to replace. The Canadians have done a heck of a job in Afghanistan. We don't tend to talk about that a lot, but they have. So if they're being replaced, then that's okay with me, except for the fact that probably 6 months after they leave, they're going to be handing out the medals for the win, and we won't be there.
Well, that's interesting. Let's 4 years ago on this network, we had a discussion about how long Canada's commitment to this country was going to be. And I'll play a little snippet of that right now, and then we'll come back and chat, if you could. Michael, roll tape. Richard.
We might have to be there for 10 years.
Yeah.
That's a realistic...
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
This is a very serious commitment we've made. And if we got out before 10 years, unless things had settled down, we'd be bugging out.
Last 20.
We have to be serious about this. We can only get out under two conditions: when things get much better or they get awfully worse, and we can't sustain it. You got to hope that things will get much better.
Janice Stein and Richard Gwynn speculating on a 10-year commitment to Afghanistan, which we are snuggling up to right now. Roland Paris, a decade in Afghanistan coming into our viewfinders right now. Have we accomplished anything significant of value to warrant that kind of commitment?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. We have been in Afghanistan one form or another since the very end of 2001, not quite a decade, but in really large numbers in Kandahar since 2006. And our involvement has been in various different locations and in different forms. So when we're talking about what we're doing now, we've been doing it for a few years. The contribution of Canada has been crucial in Kandahar. For anyone who's been over there, one thing that it struck me was the professionalism and the commitment of not just the military, but our civilians over there. I mean, it's truly extraordinary, the work that they are doing. Having said that, they are part of a larger mission which, over the past few years, has been suffering setback after setback. In some areas, there have been important improvements, and you touched on some of them in your introductory remarks, in the area of development, access to clean water, children in school, vaccinations, economic activity. In some areas, there were rapid improvements in the years ago. That is on the governance side with the first elections. But on the security side, things have been getting worse and worse. So in spite of our excellent efforts holding the line in Kandahar, things have been getting worse. So it's a real important question about what's going to happen with this surge.
General MacKenzie, I read in the New York Times, I think, was it yesterday or today, I can't remember now, that we're leaving the Valley of Death because we've decided that this is an area militarily where we lost a lot of lives, but the reality is we can't hold it. As a former military man, does this kind of thing make you question whether we made the right decisions over there?
Well, there have been some decisions that were not particularly good, and this represents one of them, where we were going after folks, the insurgents, the Taliban, whatever, and ignoring the local population. So the decision to pull out of the valley, which I'm told is a pretty darn good documentary that opens, I think, today or tomorrow. I saw it advertised on television today, is an acknowledgement that achieving nothing sitting at the head of the valley. I mean, the Russians got as far as the entrance to the valley and parked there for a couple of years. The Americans got further down, and you're sort of on top of the hill saying, come on and get me, as opposed to going into local villages and providing some security. I'd just like to make a comment about the surge, because if that surge, which wouldn't have been called a surge at the time, was there in the beginning, we wouldn't have much doubt that it was probably going to be successful. The problem is, though, we're playing catch-up, and we're playing on an uneven playing field, and even the addition of 30,000 more and perhaps 10,000 more NATO troops, there's no guarantee that it's necessarily going to work. It would have 7 or 8 years ago, but now there's no guarantee, regrettably, and NATO, being a democratic organization made up of democratic nations, there's an awful lot of them that are sitting on their hands waiting to see exactly if the American surge is going to work or not. And Obama's talking about starting to thin out in 2011. My feeling is it'll probably be the band. I don't think there's going to be many other people leave. I think the majority of the troops there are going to have to stay well beyond 2011.
Sally.
You know, this conversation runs like a tape. We keep repeating the same kinds of things. It took 10 years in Sarajevo, and Sarajevo was practically Europe. And now I understand it's being run by the mafia, but at least it's on its feet and they're exchanging dollars in the market. In Afghanistan, there was a mandate that was given to NATO. And I believe, and Lou, you would know better than I do, I believe occupying was not part of the mandate. And in order to bring security to a place, you have to take this village and occupy it and move on and get the next one and leave your people behind. But the mandate was to take the village and hand it back to the elders and move on, and the Taliban came in by night and knocked off the elders. So if that was the mandate they were stuck with, perhaps part of the lack of success had to do with the need to change the mandate.
Najia, how about you? On the issue of civilian security, do you think that the people over there feel that having Canada there for a decade was worth it?
Well, as General mentioned, that they are in Kandahar since 2006. They're not over a decade there. But still, I think that there was some strategic mistakes by NATO in general for the security in Afghanistan. That's why they are facing failures right after each other. So therefore, I think there was significant achievements in terms of development there, because we cannot achieve any development or we cannot success any developmental issues without security. So there was security that people were able to work, and you know, there was schools running and girls were going to school. It was due to the presence of the international troops, which Canada was part of that. So for that, I would say that, yeah, they played a very crucial role, a great role, and they should continue to play that role.
Yeah, Steve, if I could just
Sure.
say a bit about strategic mistakes, because I agree that they were made. The reason they were made, though, was the lack of resources and the presence of a lot of caveats. You know, some nations indicated their troops wouldn't go out at night, other ones wouldn't go outside the wire, other ones would only shoot if shot at.
So that's
those
politics.
types of things. Yeah, and that's really hamstringing the soldiers in the field. And in the case of the Canadians, there were just so few of them. You know, one soldier for every 1,000 civilians, you know, is not counterinsurgency 101. It's supposed to be somewhere around 23, 24, 25, based on a couple of models from the past. So strategic decisions were made that ended up being mistakes because of lack of resources. And as I mentioned before, now we're trying to catch up. Whether that'll be possible or not, I can only hope so.
Roland Paris, though, from the perspective of trying to defeat extremism, which was part of the original explanation of why we all in NATO went over there, have we managed to do that?
No, we haven't done that. You know, the region continues to be extremely unstable, and what we've seen during this period is the rise of a Pakistani version of the Taliban targeting the Pakistani state. You know, one of the questions that we need to be having in this debate that isn't really yet taking place in this country about what Canada's going to do, if anything, post-2011, is whether it matters whether this mission succeeds or fails, whether we have any stake, whether we have an interest as a country in seeing this international effort to try and stabilize Afghanistan succeed. I personally think that we do have an interest, because we know what would happen in that country. We have a pretty good idea if NATO were to precipitously withdraw from Afghanistan.
What do you think?
There would be a civil war. The elements of Karzai's government that used to be in the Northern Alliance would basically separate from Karzai. The Taliban would fight the Northern Alliance. And the civil war that we saw in the 1990s was absolutely devastating, not only for the people of Afghanistan, but for the security of the region, and ultimately for our security. So it would be the height of irresponsibility for us to sleepwalk through this decision without at least asking ourselves these larger questions. And as a country, we have never pretended that security outside our borders has nothing to do with us. We have a long tradition of thinking and acting in terms of international and regional security.
So Sally, is it fair to say then, Sally, that even if we didn't achieve everything that we said we wanted to when we went over there in the first place, it was still worth trying?
I don't think we had any choice. I think that Roland has just described it exactly the way it is. it would go to civil war. We were threatened. I think it was worth going, and I think in the digs they're going to say some great deal was accomplished.
Najia, are you worried about civil war if troops leave?
Yeah, absolutely.
You are?
Yeah, because I lived I lived in Afghanistan in all my life. I was in civil war, and I think it was also due to a neglect of the Western at that moment. And I think if Canada is planning to withdraw from Afghanistan, we are going to repeat the same mistake that we did in 1970.
But there is a conundrum here. On the one hand, many Afghans are sick of seeing foreign troops on their soil. On the other hand, they're concerned about them leaving too early and the place turning into a cauldron, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But the answer, you know, I remember 8 or 9 years ago, somebody asked me, what's victory mean in Afghanistan? And I said, it's leaving with a clear conscience. As you look over your shoulder, you've left behind a security organization that can at least reduce the insurgency to irrelevance, like in some other countries around the world. I think the guesstimates as to when that's going to happen are pretty optimistic in most cases. It's not going to happen. You know, you can't produce a 400,000 man army in the next couple of years. You can produce the soldiers, but you can't produce the leadership. I mean, it's a long-term investment. It's probably more like 10 years before you'll have a security force that can say, right, we can handle the insurgency, whether we have that much time. But I don't think we should leave before we honestly believe that the police and the military are capable of looking after the internal security of Afghanistan.
Gotcha. Najia, follow-up?
Yes, I just want to clear the issue that Afghans don't want to see foreigners forever there.
Not forever, yes.
Forever. We were expected that the NATO will build the capacity of our national army, that it didn't happen in last decade.
And then leave.
And then leave.
Right. Roland Paris, let me follow up with you on this one. And this is about Canada's role in the world. You got to have skin in the game in this world in order to be taken seriously. And at the very least, can we say that because of the commitment Canada made in Afghanistan, we are now taken more seriously as an international player? And if that's true, can you give me an example of how?
I think we are taken more seriously in NATO councils in particular. You know, we as a country were willing to do something that a lot of other NATO countries were not willing to do, and that is to put our soldiers and our civilians, we keep on forgetting about them, in conditions of extreme danger in a part of the country that was arguably and is the most strategically important part of Afghanistan. I think there's certainly added credibility within those circles and in military circles. I think, though, that the right way of answering the question is to say that at the same time we have concentrated our foreign policy so much in a few areas to the neglect of our broader foreign policy, so putting so much of our attention on Afghanistan that we've neglected some other elements of our foreign policy where we've in fact lost influence. And this perfect example is the United Nations and United Nations peace operations. I'm sitting beside General MacKenzie here, and we've been AWOL from UN peace operations for a long time, and now we're trying to get a Security Council seat in the United Nations. You know, we have to be cultivating influence and pursuing our objectives in a strategic way. It doesn't mean just throwing all your eggs into a few baskets.
About 2.5 minutes to go. General MacKenzie, can you follow up on that, on whether we're taken more seriously around the world given what we've done in Afghanistan?
Well, we certainly think we are, and I would say that yes, we are. Although my concern is that, for example, in the United States of America, and it would be reflected in other countries too, not a lot of the population know we're in Afghanistan. But when the ramp comes up on the last Hercules or the C-17 and the bagpipes are playing as the last Canadian soldier leads Kandahar, you can be assured that's going to be a lead story on CNN, and the rest of the world will know we've left, even if they didn't know we were there. I don't want to be over dramatic about it, but that will reduce influence, and what we leave behind should at least try and assist NATO in its training of the Afghan security forces.
Najia?
I think it's not important that world appreciate what you do in Afghanistan. It's very important that Afghan people appreciate that they are doing already. Especially the impartial diplomatic mission of Canada is really appreciated by Afghans, supporting democracy, women's rights, human rights, and all the values that we have now in Canada is one of the brand of Canadian in Afghanistan. I think for me, it's very important that Canada's efforts in Afghanistan be appreciated by Afghans, not by the world.
Sally, General MacKenzie just gave us an idea of what success looks like to him, leaving, looking over your shoulder with a clear conscience. Another definition of success might be the Taliban give up. They say uncle, to quote Ronald Reagan once upon a time. That's not likely to happen, is it? In which case, do we have to kind of think hard about what success means over there?
You know, defeating the Taliban isn't the issue. That's like saying you can defeat the mafia. This is a movement. It's a young movement, started in the early 90s. Some of them, of course, are into negotiating. That since I think I saw their negotiating list in 2006. So what does it take? You're going to have to bring most of them on side, and the hardliners will stay and create trouble forever. But I think they are moving in that direction now. Most of them are sick of fighting. Afghans are much more aware of what it takes to pull this thing together. It's better. It's better than it was.
Better than it was might be a good place to leave this discussion. Thanks so much to everybody for participating in our discussion tonight. Louis MacKenzie, the retired Major General of the Canadian Armed Forces, Roland Paris from the University of Ottawa, both of whom were in our Ottawa studios. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Sally Armstrong, Bitter Roots, Tender Shoots is her book. Najia Haneefi, the founder of the Afghan Women's Political Participation Committee. My thanks to you ladies here in our studio in Toronto.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.